And so I actually bought myself a selfie stick. Hey everybody, and welcome to episode 289 of the Ruby Rogues podcast. This week on our panel we have Jason Sweat.
Hello.
Jerome Hardaway.
What's up, everybody?
I'm Charles Max Wood from DevChat.tv, and this week we have a special guest, and that's JayMcGavren.
Hi, folks.
You want to introduce yourself real quick, Jay?
Yeah, sure. So I'm JayMcGavren. I'm the author of Head First Ruby, published in 2015 by O'Reilly, late 2015. And I'm also Treehouse's new Ruby teacher, so I do video tutorials.
Woohoo!
I think it's pretty cool, yeah.
I recently had lunch with another Treehouse teacher. He teaches JavaScript. I'm trying to remember. I've got a whole bunch of names going through my head, and I don't remember which one I need to pick out.
Andrew Chalkley, maybe? Well, we've got a whole lot of folks.
James...
Churchill?
Yeah, James Churchill. That's who it was.
Oh, nice. Cool. Yeah, he's a cool guy.
Yeah. Anyway.
All the teachers are cool folks, but...
isn't that a job requirement, right?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. I made it in somehow, too.
Nice. So, I'm curious. It seems like Head First Ruby and Treehouse kind of have a little bit... Like you get to teach people. You get to teach people some of the basics of Ruby. Did you write the book and join Treehouse for some of the same reasons? Or
yes, very much so.
Okay. Do you want to just kind of explain what your approach is then to helping people pick up Ruby?
Yeah, sure. I mean, my approach in the book, at least, is very much the general head first approach, which is try to explain everything as clearly as possible, break it down as much as you possibly can. Because I find, especially a lot of the reference programming books, they just throw so much at you at one time. And that's fine if you've got a bit of programming experience under your belt already. But if you're new, or if a language really follows a different paradigm than you've been using so far, it can just be overwhelming. So I, over the years, have just developed this knack for breaking complex topics down into more manageable chunks. And that's what I do in the book, and that's what I'm trying to bring to my Treehouse teaching as well.
I think that makes a ton of sense. I was listening to Reuven Lerner, I think, on one of these podcasts, and he said something to the effect of when he's teaching, because he does training. When he's teaching, more isn't necessarily better. Some people go in and they want to teach like everything they know in a week, not realizing that it's not necessarily better to try to teach people a ton of stuff. It's probably better to cover a small number of things, but make sure they really stick. And it sounds like that's kind of the approach that you take.
Absolutely. That was, I actually got to consult with Bert Bates, one of the series founders and co-author of Head First Java, when we were starting this up. And that was one of the things he tried to drill into me was to put your topics on trial. Is this really necessary right now? Is it relevant to the one topic that you're trying to currently teach? And are they going to need to know it right when they're starting out? And if it's not, you should just exclude it from the book altogether.
Yeah, I really liked your, I saw one of your notes about no, like, did you know sidebars, which I really appreciate, because those are pretty much invariably just distracting, no matter if it's a programming book or a business book or whatever. Yeah, like you said, if it's not necessary and super relevant to the thing that's being taught right now, just leave that out.
Yep, absolutely. You can't teach the whole language at once and expect the current topic to really stick.
Yes.
And the did you knows are always just gee whiz stuff, right? It's not actually relevant to anything you're learning. It's just, oh, here's some trivia so I can sound smart.
Right. And I won't claim that there are no sidebars in the book. There were a few things that were relevant to the current topic that kind of, elaborated on it a little bit. So there's a sidebar or two, but it's not totally random facts.
So here's a question. Who exactly is Head First Ruby good for? Like, is it only good for somebody who's completely unfamiliar with Ruby, or like for someone who has been using it for a while or has been using Rails so far for a little while? Is that something that like is good for me to go learn something new from?
I would say that even if you've been using Rails for a while, if you're not really comfortable with your grasp of the core Ruby language, like say you're wondering why this bit of syntax is like it is, Head First Ruby is still a really good resource for you. If you don't understand why keyword arguments work the way they do, for example, the chapter on hashes is going to be fantastic for you. We tried to expand it out to the broadest audience we could, but the original target is definitely somebody who has used a programming language before, maybe not completely mastered it, but they know what a variable is, what a conditional is, that is if statements and things like that. And then they're trying to move to Ruby, and we try and really expand on the topics that will seem unusual to somebody who's only programmed in, say, Java or something like that. We put a few hooks in there for complete beginners. We do briefly explain what a variable is, but that's the key target, is somebody who has done a little programming and wants to really master programming through Ruby.
Yeah,
That makes sense.
That's actually what I rated the book. I called it. It's a great book for what I call an advanced novice. A novice, I'm saying someone that has experience in programming, not particularly in Ruby, or at least have finished another beginning Ruby book and using this as a skill reinforcement tool. I was like, it's a great book if you just read, like, Learn Ruby the Hard Way, but it may not be like the right book for you if you've, mastered if you finish programming Ruby. And I recommended it to several, like, boot campers, as well as one of my friends who's going to college for CS. And so, because I feel like that would be a great book for those for people in those community, but a couple boot camp grads as well. So
Yep, boot campers were a core audience I had in mind while writing the book. I don't know how thoroughly it's reached that market, but definitely we were trying to target them.
yeah, well, that's a good market for it. I like I said, when I read it, did the exercises, I was like, it's a great reinforcement tool, because one of the things that I always hear from boot campers is that the programs they go by, they put in so much information that sometimes they want to slow down and get into a little more in depth, and that's what you get a little more. The book gets more in depth with some of the basics, some of the core Ruby, beginning Ruby syntax and structures, which I really enjoyed.
So one thing that I've noticed, though, is because I've tried writing books, and inevitably everything connects to everything else. And so I start talking about one topic, and then it's, but it would be really helpful if you understood this other topic. So, you're getting into numbers, and then you get into arrays, and then you get into some of the functional programming stuff that, the collection, I forget what they call them, collection methods that, like inject and collect and map and all that stuff. And so pretty soon I'm like, it'd be really handy to know this, but then I realize, I haven't given you enough information to really understand it when I teach it. So how do you deal with some of these things? Like when I'm teaching Rails, it's like, it'd be really handy for you to know rake, but at the same time, in order for you to understand rake, you have to understand how to pull some of this other stuff in.
I have a magic secret for determining how you're going to teach this kind of stuff. And it's to rewrite everything you're doing from scratch over and over. It's quick, it's simple, it only takes a couple of years.
Oh, is that all?
Yeah. It really is a balancing act. And I definitely have found that if you want to achieve quality work that maximizes the ease of learning for the reader, you have to be willing to do rewrites, and that there's just no workaround for it.
In other words, I have to work to work?
Afraid so. It's definitely a balancing act. And now I can tell you my general strategy for coming up with any particular chapter or anything like that is I try to come up with a really good concrete example. So it's basically a project that people are going to be working on. So for example, the number guessing game that we start chapter 1 with. The program says I've picked a random number between 1 and 100. You have 10 chances to guess it. Well, that drove teaching of conditionals because you had to compare the user's guess to the random number that the program picked. It drove loops because they get to try 10 times. And several other topics that I needed to teach for that chapter. For hashes, we needed to pick lines from a text file that contained a candidate's name and count the number of votes that had occurred. Well, the ideal solution for that problem is a hash, because you can use the candidate's name as a hash key and then keep a tally of the number of times you've seen that vote as a hash value. So you walk them through that example, and what I was doing in a lot of the chapters was I would show inefficient ways to solve the problem, and then I'd show, for example, why a hash worked so much better. There was an example where you were creating a class that created a list with comments in it. So 1, 2, and 3. And we showed why unit testing was important, because that prevented it from breaking. But basically, you just choose an example that you are sure is going to walk through the features of the programming language that you need to show, and that helps keep your learner oriented while you're going through the topic.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So I have a question for you, Jay. How long did it take you to write this book? It's a pretty big book. And I'm just curious, how long does that kind of thing take?
Yeah, it actually, we set out for 450 pages as a final target. I think we wound up going a little over 500. The project actually grew as we were working on it. And it also took a little longer than originally planned. I was keeping track of time spent on it while working on the book, and it's over 2,000 hours, probably in the area of 2,500 hours worth of work that's going into this. Yeah. So,
and is that just like spending nights and weekends on it, or is that like, similar to a full-time occupation doing that? How did you structure like when you worked on that book?
Well, I've heard different headfirst authors tackling it in different ways. Some folks try to take a sabbatical and work exclusively on the book. I wish I could have done that, but for me, it was nights and weekends because I still had a day job.
Yeah, I think that's the way a lot of people probably do it.
Jay, one of my questions is, where did you do the research for the first chapter to come to a lot of the best practices and, cognitive learning advice that you gave to the student? Some of the things I realized they were really great ideas and really great advice. I'm already in my habits, so I can do all of them. I tried literally to do everything that your book said. I can't do the wait to learn at night because I wake up super early, and by the time I sit down at the end of the day, I'm like hyped, like really drained. It's I don't even want to read like Facebook post, much less a book. So I'm an early morning guy, but I wanted to know, where did you get those advice from? Like, about, making it the last thing you learn, how to learn, even the things that you also even recommend some things in regards to diet, like making sure you're like hydrated and things of that nature. So I just want to know, like, what were the reference points and like these would really help you learn, and like using all the pictures and things of that nature. Where were those? Where was that data or that advice pulled from?
So you're talking about the intro, the how to get the best learning out of this book. That actually is not mine. That intro appears in most books in the Headfirst series. And I am pretty sure that all got started with Kathy Sierra and Bert Bates back when they wrote Headfirst Java. I don't know all the sources that they got that learning advice from. I know one book that Bert strongly encouraged me to pick up was Efficiency in Learning by Ruth Clark and several other authors. That had some general tips on how to structure learning materials to maximize how much sticks with the learner. Aside from that, I couldn't tell you all the sources they pulled everything from. But I wish I could claim credit for that, but that's definitely the series founders at work there.
Darn it, this is too much humility. You should have just said, well, I'm just a freaking genius.
I'm faking it the best I can.
All right, cool. Thank you.
So I'm a little curious, what kind of feedback have you gotten on the book? Do you get people that say, oh, I totally got hung up at this place, or the way you explained this was really great, or does it just kind of go off into a black hole and you hear from people occasionally when you're at the conference and they go, oh, you're that guy?
There hasn't been a whole lot of "you're that guy." I definitely am obsessively poring over the reviews I get at Amazon, and I'm sitting at an average of like 4.5 or 4.8 stars there right now.
Nice.
So, yeah, so high score, achievement unlocked. So.
I'm going to go start it right now.
Thanks.
It's a good book.
I'm also curious, as you're teaching at Treehouse, where do people get hung up when they're learning Ruby? Well,
so the core Ruby content was mostly taught by Jason Cipher, teacher emeritus at Treehouse. I right now am mostly focusing on a reboot of the Rails content. And I'm just about to release a course on Sinatra, too, because that's a good segue from core Ruby into Rails. As far as where folks get hung up, installation of the programming environment. I hate to say, but right at in their beginning steps is one of the most difficult aspects of getting started with programming. There's just so much that can go wrong. And we've taken pains to try to provide guides that make it as easy as possible. But, you still get DLL hell on some operating systems. There's all kinds of dependencies that can be missing. So, very often, people wind up go into our forums to seek out help when they get stuck, and we strive to answer them there if they have problems. Of course, if somebody doesn't think to go to the forums, then we never know about it, and I don't actually know how many students are getting lost that way. I wish it was easier.
Yeah, but didn't we
I
have
found
Rails
the same
installer
thing
and stuff around to make that easier, or does that not actually solve the problem?
Well, so I forget the particular reasons that I didn't recommend Rails installer for my recent Rails courses. Maybe just the fact that it wasn't set up to work with Rails 5 at that point. I seem to recall there were a couple others as well. We wound up recommending, I actually don't remember. There's a post on the Treehouse blog, which has my particular recommendations for getting set up with a Rails environment on Windows. And we also have separate posts for OS X and Linux. But basically, that was a result of, researching all the available options and figuring out which was the path of least resistance.
Well, yeah, I've found the same exact thing. Like, I've gone to some Ruby meetups where it's like, this meetup is specifically for newbies, so come and we'll teach you some stuff. And everybody's just like, hey, how do I get like anything working on my computer? And it's like, oh yeah, I forgot about that whole setup process. That can take I think it took me like a matter of days as opposed to like a matter of minutes or hours. It took me days to get set up the first time.
Yep, sometimes you're lucky and everything just falls into place. But when you're a beginner and you don't know what any of these strange debug messages that are popping up in your terminal mean, it can be a showstopper.
Yeah.
That's it.
And you don't even...
We cheat at our nonprofit when it comes to that setup. We use Cloud9, and they have a pre-set up Rails environment workspace. Like if you pick a Rails workspace, then it'll already be preset, so there's no gem set. So when we're teaching them, how to do Ruby on Rails, we can actually move over to other type of, like, as they get proficient and get more comfortable, then we can teach them how to set it up locally on their machines. So
yeah. And Treehouse went to great pains to create an environment called workspaces for that same reason. For our core Ruby classes, we actually rely on workspaces so that folks don't have to set the Ruby environment up from scratch. We don't have it working with Rails at this point, unfortunately. So folks still have to set that up from scratch on their own machines. We're going to try and fix that in the future, but we're not there yet.
I'll still work on a similar project. I will definitely share with you the GitHub I found in regards to doing that. Like, there's a GitHub repo about setting the editor up so it handles Rails 3. I'm sure some of the factoring it can handle like 4 and 5 as well. But the current one focuses on Rails 3 and how to make workspace that actually can use it.
I would be super curious to see that. Yeah.
Roger that.
I just wanted to make a quick comment too, relative to getting set up. If anybody listening to this is at the point where they're just about to get started, or they're in the process of getting started with Ruby and Rails and just getting stuff working, one of the problems I've seen with people getting started is that they don't know, like you said, Jay, they get error messages and they don't know what those error messages mean. And the biggest problem I see is that people read these error messages and they try to figure out what it means. They try to read it and understand it, when what they really should do is don't even try to understand the error message. This is my opinion. Don't even try to understand it. Just copy and paste it directly into Google and see what you find on Stack Overflow, because chances are somebody else has encountered that issue before you. So rather than trying to figure out the solution, just find somebody else's solution to that problem. It's surprising how many people don't do that.
Absolutely. Googling skills are absolutely vital. In fact, we actually demonstrate using a faux search engine in the documentation chapter, just to get people used to the idea of searching for error messages and searching for documentation on how to use particular Ruby classes and libraries.
All right, let's take a break and earn a little money for the show by talking about Hired.com. Hired is the world's most intelligent talent matching platform for full-time and contract opportunities in engineering, development, design, product management, data science, sales, and marketing. They put you in control, fill out an application, and then top employers apply to hire you. Throughout the process, your dedicated talent advocate will also have your back, providing unbiased career coaching to help you put your best foot forward with potential employers. And Hired offers access to more than 4,000 innovative employers, including big brand names like Facebook and smaller emerging startups. The size and type of company you want to connect with is totally up to you. And they help people find new opportunities in 17 major cities in North America, Europe, Asia, and Australia. So if you're open to relocation, you can let them know, and they'll work that in too. Finally, if you use our link, you can earn double the normal hiring bonus. The normal hiring bonus is $1,000, and they give you $2,000 instead. So go check them out at hired.com/RubyRoguesPodcast.
Yeah, I'm just remembering as we're talking about this. Isn't it crazy that there was a time when there was no Stack Overflow? And before that, I was even programming, and I think you guys were too, probably, before there was even a Google. How did we get anything done?
Reference books. And you'd look in the index. And if you got an error, good freaking luck.
Right. I'm a millennial. I was not around. Google was around when I started programming, so don't put me in the same space all the other old guys.
All the other old guys.
Yeah.
I'm more of an Alta Vista kind of person.
Well, and I used to work in one of those cubicle farms, and I would just I was lucky enough to have some senior developers who were ready to mentor me, and I would just stop to the cube next door and ask my question, and they were okay with being interrupted, thank goodness. Nowadays, I work from home, so I don't have the cubicle next door. Thank goodness I have Google.
Yeah, and actually, Jay, I was reading your little about blurb in the book. And it said that before you were doing Ruby, you were doing Perl stuff. Is that right?
That is right.
and then you switched from Perl to Ruby. So I'm just kind of curious about that transition. First, like, how did you get into Perl, and how long did you do it? And then, like, what prompted that switch?
So Perl, I had an unusual path up through my career. I was basically working in a data entry job for something that totally should have been automated away by then, except that it was a small enough job that it wasn't worth investing the development hours for a tool this small. And it was basically just copying descriptions from one database to another. And I was like, this should totally be automated, but I don't have any tools for this. What can I do? So I searched around. These were Windows desktops, and all I had available was Visual Basic for applications. So like the macro language that might come with Microsoft Word. And I was actually using that for manipulating text for a while. And a coworker in another department saw this, and it caused him pain, as it probably should have. And so he lent me his copy of Programming Perl and said, oh, yeah, you can totally install it on one of these desktops, because there was an easy installer available at the time. So I checked it out, and I had Hello World up and running in absolutely no time. And after a while, I was the Programming Perl book had an excellent reference to all the libraries that Perl comes with. So there were network communication libraries, and that had me talking from one database to another in very short order. Perl is a very concise language. It's very expressive, much like Ruby. And I wound up automating myself out of a job, basically. So they promoted me to, I think they called it automation analyst. And so I wound up building on this Perl program to copy stuff from one database to another.
And what year and time was this?
This was taking place between 2000 and 2003.
Okay.
And this company I was with, Java was their main language. It wasn't Perl. And eventually enough people were relying on this program of mine that they said, okay, we need to bring you into the actual development department, and you need to learn Java, because we are not going to maintain this oddball program all the time. We can't get rid of it because we need it, but this you need to start working with the official company tools. And so my official day job was Java for quite a while, but of course, Perl was still my preference on the side. But there was that whole debacle with the transition from Perl 4 to Perl, or from Perl 5 to Perl 6, where it just kept getting pushed out and pushed out. Of course, Perl 6 is available now, but that was about a decade too late for me. So I made the jump to Ruby instead, which I really consider Ruby to be very much a kindred spirit to Perl. It has its roots in the Unix command line. There's a surprising number of syntactic structures that are the same between the two languages. Not many people.
Can you think of any examples of those?
I believe argv, for example, the array for getting command line arguments, I want to say that originally came from Perl. A lot of the usage for Ruby on the command line, where you can type Ruby-E to evaluate a snippet of code right there on the command line, that came from Perl. Just many, many little details that still exist in Ruby today that got borrowed from the Perl language.
Nice. Yeah, I remember that when I got into Ruby, the way that I came to it was that I'd been doing PHP for a number of years, and I didn't necessarily hate it. But then on the side, I started doing Lisp, and I thought Lisp was really interesting. And the more Lisp stuff I did, the less I liked PHP. But back then, nobody was really doing web applications with Lisp. And so I wanted like a more practical tool. And that's what led me to Ruby. And I think when I was reading about Ruby's origins, I read that it had roots in Lisp and Perl also.
Yep, absolutely. I haven't gotten to do a whole lot of Lisp coding, but I have heard, I want to say blocks or a structure similar to it originally came from Lisp.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I thought the map function was really handy too. Like when I first found that, it made so much sense. And it's like, why does this not exist in PHP? I believe it does now, but at that time it did not.
Yep, map is awesome. Most of the methods coming from enumerable are awesome. I have to tell you, though, when I was first picking up Ruby, I was learning from Programming Ruby, the Pickaxe book. I encountered blocks, and I was like, okay, I'm just going to flip to another chapter here because I don't get that at all. And that is why I spend a whole lot of time, 2 chapters, on teaching blocks in Headfirst Ruby, and just break it down into really small bites, because I know blocks were very intimidating for me when I first came to the language. I'd never seen anything like them, and I figured they might be for other folks too.
That might be an interesting thing to talk about, and it kind of brings up something else that I wanted to ask about, which is. Okay, so when I first started learning Rails, I kind of learned Rails first and then learned Ruby. Like obviously Rails uses Ruby, so you have to know some Ruby in order to use Rails. But I just like got started with Rails without worrying about teaching myself a ton of Ruby in depth first. And then I went back and learned more Ruby. And I still don't have that depth of knowledge that I think I should. And what I wonder, that you probably know a lot better than me, is for somebody who started Rails and has never used like anything that's Ruby without Rails, is there anything that they might be neglecting or have missed somehow that they could or should be taking advantage of in Ruby that you wouldn't be exposed to just by using Ruby within Rails? Hopefully that question makes sense.
Yeah, it definitely does. I'm not the ideal person to ask about this because I came at it the other way. I definitely worked very hard on the core Ruby language before messing with Rails very much. But basically, if I had to guess, a lot of folks are going to be missing out on a lot of the capabilities of the core Ruby classes. So, for example, everything that array and hash, those classes inherit from the enumerable module, methods like map and find and all that good stuff. Not the version of find that Active Record provides, but the ability to actually search within an array. Yeah, basically anything relating to the core classes I find really gets glossed over during Rails tutorials, and there's so much power available there that I really think folks could benefit from learning to harness it.
Yeah, I'll chime in on this too, because I mean I came into it learning Rails and then I learned Ruby, and once I figured out how Ruby worked, then my Rails got a whole lot easier because it wasn't just do it this way, but it was, I started to understand why it's that way. And I think you alluded to that a bit there, Jay, when you were talking about, for example, the enumerable module. I mean, I just took it for granted that anything that was a collection had each and map and reduce and all that stuff on it. And I didn't really understand that until I got into mixing in modules or the class system and how that works and how inheritance works and how we use multiple inheritance with the mixing in of modules, and how we structure our classes, and how we pull together just other things to compose as opposed to inherit different functions and features. And then just seeing, as you said, some of the core classes and how they're really designed in Ruby as opposed to just taking for granted that they do specific things. So for me, it was much less like what the core classes of Ruby are capable of, as much as just why they're put together the way that they are and why that helps Rails be what it is, and then how everything can kind of hang together so that I can organize my code and take advantage of the ways that Ruby functions in putting my functionality in place with the functionality of Rails and other systems that I pull in.
Yep, absolutely. Rails and the default Rails project structure are very much a product of the Ruby environment that they're built on top of. And when you understand that Ruby environment, Rails becomes a lot less magical. And I mean that in a good way. You actually understand what's going on a lot better.
Yeah, I think one thing that people could stand to understand a lot better that is Ruby but not Rails is just using plain old Ruby objects in your Rails projects. I remember reading this Steve Klabnik blog post where he mentioned that it took him a long time, and it took me a long time too, to realize that not everything in your app/models folder has to inherit from active record. It can just be a plain old Ruby class. And if you understand that, then you can make your code, I think anyway, you can make your code a lot more organized if you do it that way. And it can benefit your testing a lot, because if you have classes that are just plain old Ruby objects, those can be a lot faster to test than ones that do a lot of the database interaction. But that's not something that I see in a lot of Rails apps that I come across.
Absolutely, because the tutorials don't cover it.
Yes, that's actually something that we ran into in our experience. Actually, two things that we've run into is what you're referring to, that how there's a lot of things that just are very Ruby-esque that people don't tend to learn when you're dealing with just Rails. That's why one of my favorite books that I picked up when I was learning was the Ruby Cookbook, and it just has a bunch of stuff in it that you wouldn't even think that Ruby could do on its own. But when it comes to back to what Jason was saying and what Jay just said, they don't teach a lot of that. They don't teach that in the tutorials. It just leaves them out, and you're supposed to figure it out on your own. So I'm definitely wanting it to do that more. I guess I want I want more Ruby-esque, more Ruby-based tutorials out there that could actually focus on the little nuances of Ruby code. And I was just wondering, follow up, what can we do, like as a community, to do that? Because to get that more, focusing more on the core language and not just learn enough Ruby so you can do Rails effectively. Mind frame that's currently out there.
Well, that's a good question. You know how I talked about how it was important to keep a laser focus on the topic at hand. That's what I was trying to do in Headfirst Ruby. I really don't blame the Rails tutorials for not talking about core Ruby too much, because they need to be laser focused on the Rails content. As a community, what can we do? I would say to steer people towards thorough Ruby tutorials that teach, the Ruby standard library, and just more than the absolute basics, to give people a really solid foundation before they move on into Rails. Or if you're doing a tutorial that's aimed at teaching people Rails first, end it by saying, hey, it would be valuable to you as a Rails developer to go back and learn core Ruby classes. Pick up the Pickaxe book, pick up Headfirst Ruby, because we really didn't have room to teach you here everything that you need to know about core Ruby. And there is still more to learn, and it can still make your code better.
Hey, do you need a sanity check on your code? Make sure all the tests are passing, make sure all the static assets compile, all the normal things that you need to do to make sure that your application is ready for production. Then you need continuous integration, and I recommend Snap CI. Snap CI is a product put together by our friends at ThoughtWorks, and it works great to pull all of your information together about your application, make sure it's ready for production, let your team know if it fails, and overall just make your life easier. So go check them out at snapci.com. One other thing I see in this, and I totally agree on the laser focus part of things, we're trying to get people to results so they get the payoff so that they'll stick around. And, and so that's hard if we're teaching them core Ruby concepts in the middle of a Rails tutorial. But I also agree, as we put solutions up on Stack Overflow and things like that, not just to give people the solution, create a plain old Ruby object that does X, Y, and Z in your Rails app, but also explain why. This doesn't need any of the active record stuff, and so we're just creating a plain old Ruby object, and we're inserting these couple of modules, and this is why it works, and here's a brief explanation of the class system in Ruby.
Absolutely. I hate cargo culting, which is the old term for that, borrowing a snippet of code without really understanding it. It's an obvious pattern for beginners to fall into, so not really their fault, but they definitely need to be taught the importance of understanding that code that they're adding to their application.
Okay, another question for you, Jay, just about the process of writing the book. Now that you've written it, and I realize that it came out relatively recently, but do you expect to have to like periodically go back and refresh it and update it and stuff like that as the technology moves forward, or is it kind of evergreen stuff that you, for the most part, won't have to touch?
That was the reason I wanted to write about a book about core Ruby specifically, is that I'm expecting it to be fairly evergreen. Core Ruby, and this is one of the things I love about the language, changes nice and slowly. There's not a new framework coming out every couple of weeks that you have to learn. There aren't Python 2 to Python 3, the transition there. The statement to print a line to the terminal changed. It didn't work anymore. And so suddenly a whole bunch of Stack Overflow answers didn't work properly anymore. That kind of frustration is something that the Ruby core team works very carefully to avoid. And so literature out there about Ruby definitely lasts a long time. And I didn't want to write a book that I was going to have to be updating every 6 months or whatever. I'm hoping that this will be a useful resource exactly as it is for a long time to come.
That's great. And
I'm sorry, is that the reason that we all got into like Ruby and Rails? That was my main selling point, was that I didn't want to deal with JavaScript, the JavaScript burnout. Like I didn't want to spend every waking moment learning a new framework. Like for JavaScript, I know like 3 frameworks and I'm content with them. And because I use Ruby most of the time. So that makes isn't that where we all you know what? We love Ruby because it doesn't change. You don't wake up in the beginning of the morning and, oh snap, there's something new that I have to learn to stay relevant. I don't know, that was just me. I loved it being the fact that it was, as you guys said, evergreen and very few changes over the years. It's very stable, in my opinion.
It's funny that you say that, because yesterday I recorded a JavaScript Jabber episode with the other panelists and with Sasha Grief, who put together stateofjs.com. And it's this big, massive survey that, like 90,000 people took or something. And it talks about the state of JavaScript in the community now. And the results came out like a month ago. And what's really interesting is that, people basically said, that JavaScript is moving in the right direction, but they also said that that the rate of change is way too fast. Like overwhelmingly, like 80% of people said that the rate of change is too fast.
Oh yeah, I get that from our troops. They're like JavaScript. They're like they would prefer to look for Rails positions than JavaScript positions, because they're like it changed. Like every time that they're trying to learn something new comes out. They're like, there's so much stuff out there. I was like, I know, right? Just it's really hard to get a base comfort level of starting to actually know what you're doing. And that's why I personally love Ruby. So
I will say, though, that I remember back in 2006, 2007, 2008, Ruby the language wasn't changing a ton. I mean, we moved from 1.8 to 1.9, which was a little bit of change or a little bit of things you had to learn that were different between the two. But for the most part, it was pretty stable. However, there was a lot of action just out there and people creating gems that did all kinds of different things. And, there was a lot of angst over which authentication library do I use in Rails and which whatever else library do I use in Rails, and should I use Mongoid or Active Record or something else. And, I think a lot of that is really settled now. And so we're benefiting from the community having gone through this explosive growth. And at this point, it's something that is, at least in the community as well as in the language, very stable and very well understood. And even though there are still new things coming out in the Ruby community, it's not at this crazy frantic pace that we had before. And I don't think it ever got as fast and as crazy as the JavaScript community is now.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, I appreciate that the Ruby and Rails stuff doesn't change at the crazy pace that the JavaScript stuff does, but I think our choice of using Ruby and Rails like predates a lot of that stuff.
Yeah.
Because this is only in the last few years that we've had these really robust front end frameworks like Angular and React and stuff like that. I remember, I think it was like 2012 or so when I started getting into that stuff semi seriously. And I remember that I was evaluating like Backbone versus I don't remember what, but like Backbone was one of the most sophisticated things out there at the time that I was aware of, at least. And obviously things are a lot different now.
Well, remember, I'm rookie on deck once again. Give it up for the young people on the road. So I started coding in 2011, and that was when like this stuff started really kicking off. Was about all the JavaScript framework, like how Node just exploded, and then everybody was talking about Node all the time, and I was making that life decision of whether I was going to go PHP, Ruby, or JavaScript, and I was like, you know what? Well, around 2012, 2013, I was like, I think I'm just going to really focus on PHP and Ruby and learn JavaScript to the point like where I'd get comfortable with it, but not make it to like, oh, this is going to be where I'm bread and butter at. The funny thing is, because of Ruby and Ruby on Rails, I've learned more about JavaScript. Or if I honestly decided to sit down and learn JavaScript, I wouldn't have learned. So if it wasn't for Ruby on Rails, I would have never learned React, Angular, or Ember. I think I would have just been like, nah, I'm good. So, like I said, I was around when I was coming up and learning code. That's this JavaScript explosion started happening.
I want to say that it seems like a lot of this explosive growth, or lack thereof, comes out of the language that everything is built on top of. So Ruby is very much like Python, batteries included. There's a whole ton of useful functionality on the core classes right out of the box. You don't have to write your own stuff. With JavaScript, there's so much that you do, and that means that you either write your own framework or you adopt one of the existing ones, and hey, which existing framework should I choose? I want to say that it's the language itself that is leading to that, helping lead to that explosive growth.
There's definitely truth in that. The other thing is that JavaScript itself as a language is changing, where we're starting to see the ECMAScript standard, ES 2015, 2016, 2017, start to really get adoption, and they're starting to implement some of those things in the browsers and stuff like that. And so people are trying to get a consistent experience, and a lot of the movement is around things like build tools and stuff like that in JavaScript. And that's just an area that we really haven't had to deal with at all in Ruby.
Yep, I'm glad we have Bundler. I'm glad that we have Ruby gems. I'm glad that we have so much functionality ready to go out of the box, so there's no need to debate over which solution we'll use.
Yeah, and the only real debate over which solution we'll use is, do I want to run this on the Ruby VM or JRuby or Rubinius? And luckily for us, the majority of stuff in all those cases just works. And so even that's not a major departure like ES 2015 or TypeScript is from ES5, which is the current fully implemented JavaScript version in the browser.
I was about to say that. I was like, my first question was going to be like, okay, tabs or spaces? Which one? Go.
Actually, it's interesting. I'm looking into the Go language lately, and they have quite firmly decided tabs, period. They've got this Go format tool that's included with every Go distribution. And if you feed it a file, it'll reformat it for you according to the community standards. Basically, however Go format reformats your code, that is the standard. It'll replace all your spaces with tabs, period. There is no discussion.
Wow.
I think that's great because I like it when somebody else makes those decisions for us. Because the alternative is to like have an internal debate with your development team.
I like it as long as they're the right decisions.
Right. No, but like if you have a development team, like I've always been of the opinion that you should use somebody else's coding standards rather than come up with your own, because some of that stuff is going to have to be arbitrary decisions, and you can burn so much time just debating that stuff. And so it's better to take somebody else's, and you might not agree with every choice they made, but at least since it's somebody else's, it's just not open for debate.
Absolutely. My general philosophy is smarter people than me have looked at this and come to this decision. I'm just going to go with it.
Yeah, we use Airbnb style guide. Like, we're like, you know what, they're doing pretty good, so we'll just go ahead and hop on and use their style guide.
Well, and ultimately, for me, it's, okay, do I really need to take the time to make this decision? Like, it's not even down to, have smarter people than me actually looked at this. It's, I don't have time to make this decision, so I'll gloss over it. Yeah, this looks close to what I want, and so I'll implement it, and then I will pick up the pieces and say, this piece isn't what I want, and then I'll switch it out once it becomes painful enough for me to actually want to spend time on it. All right. Well, before we get to picks, Jay, do you want to quickly tell people where they can follow you, buy your book, check out other stuff that you're doing?
Absolutely. So you can follow me on Twitter. My handle is JayMcGavren, all one word, JayMcGavren, as in Victor, REN. It's a little bit funny spelling, so hopefully we can link that from the episode notes as well. And if you want to check out Head First Ruby for yourself, they're on Amazon. Just go search for it.
Awesome. All right, well, let's go ahead and do picks. Jerome, do you want to start us off with picks?
Yes, roger that. My first pick is Effective Ruby, 48 specific ways to write better Ruby. I just picked this book while I was out in San Francisco for Veterans Day week, and from what I've been reading, it's really good. It makes it a lot clearer. It's been one of my things now, just trying to read every Ruby book out there, to mostly to upset my wife, but to actually get better at the language too. Another pick, I would say the ACE editor, GitHub. For those of you who are looking into doing like a cool project, or like how to make a Rails app that actually has an inline text editor that you can actually, implement code and then run it, I would definitely recommend you guys looking up the ACE editor project tutorial. So those are my two picks.
Nice. Jason, what are your picks?
Okay, so my two picks are books as usual and non-programming related as usual. The first one is this book called Titan, which is it's a biography of John D. Rockefeller. That book was super interesting, and what I found was even more interesting was actually John D. Rockefeller's dad was a really interesting character. So that was an awesome book. I listened to it on audio, and it was super great. My other pick is, I guess, kind of a classic novel, Something Wicked This Way Comes by Ray Bradbury. I thought that was a really awesome book. I don't read a lot of fiction, but that one was really, really great.
Very cool. I've got a few picks here. So the last week or two, I was in Nashville, and then I was in New York City. And while I was in Nashville, I wasn't actually in Nashville. I was staying at a resort called Evans Mill, which is out by Smithfield, something. Anyway, and I was out there for 3 days. It was just gorgeous out there. Beautiful, beautiful area. I was out there for a retreat with my mastermind group. And so I'm going to pick Evans Mill just because it was amazing. And then I am also going to pick, while I was in New York City, I decided to book myself a couple extra days just in the city to see the city. And while I was there, I realized that after a while, everybody else went home because the conference was over. We were out there for Microsoft Connect. We were doing a bunch of podcast interviews for JavaScript Jabber and iFreaks. And anyway, so it became a little bit tricky to get pictures taken because I either had to bug people who were out there on their vacations, which most people didn't mind, but at the same time, I didn't want to bug people. And so I actually bought myself a selfie stick. And I always thought that those things were kind of funny, but it was $10 and I could get mostly the angle that I wanted. I did think it was pretty funny while I was out there. There were other folks out there with selfie sticks. They were usually teenage girls, and it was funny because the way they had their camera pointed, you could only see like the top half of their body, if that. It was probably more like a headshot or something. But they would do a full body pose and then take a picture of themselves from the neck up. And I just thought that was hilarious. But anyway, so I actually own a selfie stick. I don't know if that takes me down a notch or two in your eyes, folks. But anyway, kind of interesting.
I'm judging you.
What was that?
I'm judging you, just to let you know.
Okay.
You might fit in with those teenage girls better, though.
I know. I need to cock my head to one side and like put one foot up on my calf and and strike a nice little pose there. Anyway.
Please stop. I'm like, this is like.
Yep. Anyway, so those are my picks. Jay, what are your picks?
Okay, so I love video games, and in honor of appearing on the Ruby Rogues show, I picked a roguelike game, one that imitates the old dungeon exploration game Rogue. This is the Shiren the Wanderer series, Shiren. But Rogue was just, you had to look at squiggles in a terminal and decipher what the heck they meant. Shiren is way more approachable than that. It's got cool graphics, but more importantly, it's got really deep gameplay. It's chess-like in that it's turn-based. You have to carefully position all your characters in combat or you're going to risk losing the battle. Just very deep gameplay. It's a little bit, many of the installments are a little bit older, but that means they're pretty cheap on Amazon. So there's versions available on the Nintendo DS, which is going to be compatible with your 3DS systems if you have to borrow them from your kids or whatever. There's a version out there for the Wii, which also runs on the Wii U, of course. And there's a version that just came out for the PlayStation Vita. Love those games. Super deep. Definitely worth a look. Second pick is a book. It's an older one. It's called The Humane Interface. It's by Jeff Raskin, who was a core member of the original Macintosh project. Basically, it's all about making software interfaces that are possible for beginners to learn and second nature for experienced users. That is totally automatic. You don't have to think while you're using the software designs that are in this book. You'll learn about user interface sins that are way too common in modern software. And this book will teach you things like why search that wraps around to the start of a document, like in many web browsers, is evil, for example. Just a great book. It'll change the way you look at computers. It'll make you very frustrated with a lot of their aspects, unfortunately, but it's a really good read, especially if you design user interfaces. And that's what I got.
All righty. Well, thanks for coming, Jay. It was fun to talk and interesting to just dig into some of this stuff.
My pleasure. It was great talking to everybody today.
All right. Well, we'll go ahead and wrap this one up, and we'll catch you all next week.
Bye, guys.
Thanks, folks.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.